This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey everyone, welcome to the last part of our in-depth movie review sub-series where we've been going through the Dune movie and breaking it down scene by scene. So really excited to get into that last section of the movie, discuss the ending and all of our thoughts on all that. So this is Marcus here today, Garin.
Hey, it's Garin again. It's good to be on the show again and talk through the deep stuff. That's what I like.
Yes, everyone, Johnny, Sobchak back. We are in the home stretch, fellas. It's been a long, fun kind of journey recapping it and just rediscovering, kind of enjoying every little scene in detail and hearing. I just love hearing other people's perspectives. That's why, this is fun, and I hope other people are enjoying it too.
Simon here, and yeah, this is apparently the last part of the review. Let's see if we can knock it out, right, boys?
Yeah, so before we go into that, let's just go quickly into one quick movie news story.
Dune Movie News.
So last week we talked about the home video release of Dune. So we know that the Blu-ray, the 4K Ultra HD and DVD versions, so all the physical disc releases will be on January 11th, and we have the full details there about that there is indeed going to be about an hour of extras. So some of them appear to be new, so hopefully we'll get some more details on there as it approaches. And we couldn't say that last week because it wasn't confirmed yet, but now we know that the digital release is going to be on December 3rd. So you'll be able to purchase it for, as they call it, premium digital ownership on platforms like Amazon Prime Video and Apple iTunes and wherever digital movies are sold. So yeah, I guess that will be helpful for us and you if you're looking to watch it over the holidays. That will be the best option to doing so. And we had mentioned that already. Like the movie is already available for digital purchase in Europe, and I've seen that it's coming out in the next week or so, like even earlier for example in South America. So it'll vary depending on where you are, but keep an eye out if it hasn't released yet in your country. It should be like releasing digital over the next week or two, unless you're in Australia or New Zealand where the movie hasn't been released yet at all. So without further ado, let's just go straight into the last part of our movie review. And just looking back, like honestly, just the book alone, the story of Dune, there's so much to talk about, but it really speaks to like all the layers of this movie and all the effort that went into it, and like whether it's the technical details or like how they handled the editing, that there's just so much to talk about. I mean, we've already been discussing just the movie alone for the past five episodes, and this is the sixth one where we're wrapping it out. And I think we could go on and like keep going to this movie in more detail, and we probably will further down the line. But there's just there's so much depth to this movie. I think people are going to be talking about this for years ahead, especially with the next part coming up. So the first scene we're going to look into is when Paul is actually exiting the still tent. So we've really had a moment, which is that coming of age moment for Paul, almost like basically like a rebirth. And symbolically, that he's basically like coming from outside, like using that sand compactor to get out of the still tent, and he's basically arising out of the ground. Really powerful scene. And as he comes out, you see the little Muad'Dib running around. So starting with you, Simon, what was your impression of Paul's rebirth in this sense?
It's funny, I didn't think about him again, rebirth. As we said in the previous episode, this is where Paul is the no point of no return. The thing I loved the most about the scene was seeing the little mouse again. I love that they're hinting at the mouse, if you know what it is, and I hope they mention why we saw so much of the mouse in the second part. It is crucial, especially for someone's name and the name that they will carry on for the rest of their lives.
That's one of my favorite parts of the movie, especially the first time I saw the movie, because I wasn't expecting it. I hadn't really seen or heard anything about this little guy showing up. So that was very pleasantly surprised. Of course, we do get an image of him earlier in the movie with the film book, but it was nice that they kind of planted that seed, and then it comes forward here when he does show up. And without fail, every single time I've seen the movie, all 5 times in theaters, because it's very quiet and very it cuts to the outside of the tent, and then it does a very tight close up on this mouse that comes up the hill, and people are like, it's just like, oh, like it's just like this little release after this very intense sequence. So just really great timing, and for the fans of the book, they are going to go crazy for that because they know what it means. For people who have no idea what it means, it's just a cute mouse and just gives you kind of another glimpse into the ecological world of Arrakis, which I think is great.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what struck me. The movie kind of shifts from this really intense energy, and suddenly you're in the middle of this desert, and every shot is very quiet and serene until we get to the next sort of event. But it's very contemplative. It's almost like the attack, and Paul realizing what's ahead, and he sees the future, and they've escaped. They're at least alive at this point. So it's almost like the audience gives a big sigh of relief at this point in the movie, just because, okay, they lived. It looks like they're going to live a little longer, as far as you can tell. But these scenes are just gorgeous. I mean, just and what's interesting is, unlike what I remember in some of the other versions of this story, it's all very muted. I mean, part of the rest of this story takes place actually at night, right? So it should be dark, but everything is just muted in terms of its lighting, but yet it's just gorgeous seeing this planet, seeing this, endless dunes as far as the eye can see, and then the rock formations are just gorgeous. So for me, this is a little bit of a respite, but then very quickly you're reminded all is not safe, right? There's other things at work beneath the surface. So I like the bonding. I like the connection that you still feel between Paul and Jessica, even though their relationship has gone through some changes. Paul reprimands his mother in the stilltent, as we talked about last time, but yet they're together in this. They're united despite their challenges. So it's a bit of a break, I think, for the audience, but you don't get a break for long. So
Paul and Jessica get reunited with Duncan, Idaho. So like there's the ornithopter that comes down, and there's a tense moment. You think, okay, are these going to be like Harkonnens again, like coming to get them? But like they soon realize that it's Duncan, Idaho, and immediately like you realize that something has changed. So I'll start with you, Johnny. Like, what did you take away about this encounter?
I love Jason Momoa running up and just like embracing them, and he immediately kind of kneels, and we all know what it means, and Paul is the Duke now, and he is the heir. So I think it's kind of like this moment of realization, because there's also the shots where once he kneels, you see Jessica looking at them, the two of them, and like, oh my God, like this is actually happening. And Paul kind of, it cuts to him, and it seems like he kind of feels the same way. Like he's just kind of looking down, almost like in disbelief. And it's almost like another wave of like realization that my father's gone. I'm the Duke. Everyone essentially is gone for all intents and purposes, except me, my mother, and Duncan, Idaho.
I mean, pretty much this is House of Atreides right now. That's it.
I like the change that comes over, not only in the still tent, but also in this scene in Paul. I don't think the reaction on his face was he wasn't expecting Duncan to kneel down and declare his loyalty to him as the Duke. But it's like he embraces it when it happens. It comes as a bit of a shock, but then he takes it on, and Jessica kind of accepts it, is what the look on her face was from my point of view. from this point on, he has a different energy around him. He has a different demeanor. That young man that we see with his father early on in the film that is doubtful of himself, am I really the future of House Atreides? You don't see that. You don't see that person anymore. It's a change in him, and that's the arc of this character that's so great to see in this film, and what will happen later in the next film as well, which will be pretty mind-blowing to those that don't know the story.
If you contrast this scene, just going back a bit earlier, like before the attack, like when Duncan Idaho had returned, and it was the first time that Paul was seeing him after a month, because Duncan Idaho had gone earlier, and you have that friendly hug, and like Paul was, like he had that huge smile on his face, and like contrast that to now, you see that the relationship dynamic has changed. This isn't like a case of like two close friends or that like younger brother older brother dynamic, but this is like, now Paul is like really reflecting, like he realizes that he is the Duke, and like Duncan Idaho is showing like this great deference towards him. Like he realizes also like this is the head of the house, like this is where my loyalty lies. So that whole relationship has basically transformed literally overnight. And there is that sense of heaviness with Paul. When Duncan first kneels, and like I think it takes a moment for Paul to understand what's going on, and he's like reflecting, but he realizes everything. Like my father is dead. Like I'm the Duke now. Then we go to the scene in the movie. It's like a longer segment at the ecological testing station. So basically, if you read some of the expanded books, you might know some of the lore there about how it's already been for a long time that they were working on looking at bringing back more plant life to Arrakis.
As I was watching it the first time, I was like, there should be that scene, and I didn't remember if we saw that earlier on when we first land on Arrakis. We see one of those stations, or later. It's also such a huge set. Like the scene with the ornithopter when they land and when they take off again, it's so massive. And when the Sardaukar come in and the whole fight with Duncan, which we'll talk about shortly, it's just such a huge set. I never pictured it that big. Like in the books, I always thought these stations were like maybe a quarter of that.
They're escaping the coming storm, so they're finding refuge. If you remember, they tie down the ornithopter. They almost like tent stakes, and they're putting this cover over it so that it doesn't. I mean, I don't know. It probably does get covered, much the same way the still tent did, but at least they have a way to get it out, and all the gear is not destroyed. But they're going into this ecological testing station as a refuge, and what I find interesting about this is, they're sort of, you feel like this is a safe place. I love the coffee service thing. I think that's really a great way to kind of showcase how little water there is that they have to work with. And here, Liet asks them to bring them coffee service, and somehow they make coffee out of they don't finish it, but they try to make coffee out of just a few, people spitting into this machine. But that's the way it is. That's how the Fremen work. They have very little water to work with, but they have an abundant life nevertheless. But I also like how you have Paul, he keeps questioning Liet. He keeps asking her, what's your deal? And of course she's very, she avoids it until a certain scene a little later on in this segment. But I like how we're following the book. This is in the book, but you're following these characters, and their relationships are still expanding. We're still learning more about them. And I also love how we see Duncan's, just like we just talked about a moment ago, we see Duncan, even though he's almost like the older fun uncle to Paul, he's not now. He's devoted. He knows his role, and he is loyal to the Duke, who is now Paul. So I agree with Simon as well. It's a beautiful set. It's enormous, and I like that. I like that it feels like wow, this somehow was used before. In fact, Leah explains it when she's walking through the hall. She says, this was used to transform the planet before spice was discovered, and then it became a source of spice for the whole world, the whole galaxy or universe. So it's almost like this thing was used to transform, and that can happen, later if those of you who have read the books understand that part. But it has some history. It's also a refuge, but then some really exciting things happen in this sequence.
Just to kind of add on to the other comments here that I certainly agree with and feel the same way. There's one thing in particular that hasn't really been mentioned, but every time that I watch the movie and Duncan walks into that room where there's the plants growing, it's just it's like a shock to the system, because there has been no green or any sort of plant life for so long at this point in the movie. To see that vibrant color and just the little tiny details and textures on the plant and the leaves, it really it's just nice. There's I mean, we are earthbound creatures, so there's something to be said for plant life and greenery, and so I think that just those little psychological things that go on in this movie and in Villeneuve's movies. So I thought that was just really interesting. And also back to the point about the coffee, I love the coffee bit in this, because it just adds a little bit more to the Fremen. It just, textures their culture a little bit. It recalls the spitting that happens earlier in the movie with Stilgar when he comes in, spits on the table, and it's a sign of respect. And, it's moisture that, the reason they value their moisture in that way, and we see that now, is that they can use it for things like this. It's not something that they just take for granted, and they're not just going to be spitting on the ground like some of us would be, just walking around. There is the moment where there is a kind of a one-on-one meeting of the minds, or battle of the minds, between Paul and Leah, and Jessica's just kind of watching on, and there is this. You kind of start to see glimpses of Paul Muad'Dib. This is not Paul Atreides anymore. He is coming around to the acts of manipulation, and he is leveraging himself politically and basically making a play for the throne, which is exactly what Leah says. And it's pretty audacious. And she's just like, you have no idea what the hell you're talking about. And of course, what he's going to go on to do, if Leah knew what was going to happen, she'd probably cut his head off right there. But she really can't. There is part of her. She says, as a throwaway line, is superstition, just superstition. And it's are you saying that because you believe it, or are you saying that because you're trying to convince yourself that it's just superstition, that this isn't something to be acted on? And ultimately, she does act to assist them and to help them survive, and that has huge consequences for the rest of the universe. And that it's just funny how these micro moments end up being so important. And then also there is the tiny detail, which of course we've all seen probably multiple times at this point, not even just outside the movie, but there's the beetle that returns, that was in the dream, the vision earlier in the movie, where there's that hall just full of Sardaukar bodies, and there is Duncan in there laying on the ground, and there's a beetle just crawling along the ground. And in this moment, while they are having this discussion, Duncan is out in the hall, and he is looking at this beetle, and he is putting his hand on it. He has it on his hand, and it's interrupted, of course, by this attack that's about to happen. And you guys have probably seen the mentions and the kind of readings of this beetle, because Villeneuve himself, speaking on this moment and what it means within the film itself, the kind of symbolism of this interruption, he says that it was inspired by Seven Samurai. And there's this moment, I've seen Samurai one time, and it was a few years ago, so I don't remember exactly, but there is a moment where someone is in almost in a field, and they're picking flowers and kind of messing with these plants. And in the distance, you hear this violence and these swords clattering, and that this person is about to be, enveloped by this attack. And, it's like, despite the violence and the death that is kind of oncoming, they're still finding this quiet moment in that, with nature and with the natural world. And that is, cut off by this violence. But also, and I want to hear what you guys think about this, and if you've already heard it, but the actual symbolism of the beetle itself. But I thought there was a really interesting reading, and I'm going to pull it up because I do have it saved, actually. And the fact that the beetle, it has some connotations to it, and its meaning as an animal, that I found particularly enticing. And basically, it was just saying that beetles are, in European culture, they kind of represent bad omens or death, which, of course, there's this bad omen that these Sardaukar are now showing up and are about to kill everyone that's there. But in Egyptian culture, of course, and this is seen, with, ancient Egyptian culture with the pharaohs and pyramids and whatnot. But the beetle represents renewal and rebirth and a second life for these pharaohs and other figures. So it's very fitting that Duncan, this Twitter user, a friend of Jamis, says it's fitting then that Duncan leaves a Eurocentric planet for a desert setting and stumbles upon this beetle at the time that he does, and that it is this character. So it is kind of this meaning within a meaning, which is just like, there's nothing that's coincidence in this movie and in a lot of these films. So I just love that, and I have been wanting to talk about that a little bit more. And I was really glad someone was thinking along those lines and kind of pointing that out.
It's taking everything in me not to spoil something for later books. But let's just say there's a reason why that beetle is there, and you said it, and it wasn't the European culture one. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And we all know that Denis, he thinks this deep as well. And you're right. Nothing is left to chance in these films. Every shot, every scene is composed. So the decision to use a beetle kind of fits. It checks all the boxes, really, because it could be there. That's like an insect that could probably survive, I would imagine, in that kind of environment. But it's a huge foreshadowing, right? Not only of what's about to happen, but what happens with Duncan, Idaho, which is a very long interaction throughout the rest of these stories. We leave that scene with Duncan staring right into the camera. Just that always hits me really hard with the symbolism of the beetle, his loyalty to House Atreides. He gives his life for Paul and Jessica, and there's just a lot of symbolism there. So, I'd love to go into all the spoilers. We could probably have another hour and talk about the future of what we're talking about, but I'll leave that to Marcus to direct us on that.
There are a lot of factions in the Dune universe that we haven't seen yet. Whether it's, for example, the Guild Navigators, the full ones that we haven't actually seen how they look like, and then of course there's another faction that isn't doesn't factor into the first book, but then they're very important in the second book onwards. And this beetle is obviously a connection to that faction. So yeah, it's interesting. Like even in all these scenes where you don't always see factions physically present. Like for example, last week we talked about in Attack. You heard some of the music from the Bene Gesserit. So that theme. So it's clear that all these factions are at play, whether they're actually present at that moment or not. So yeah, it just is so reassuring that it's Denis Villeneuve who he's filming this, and someone who knows not just the first book but the series well, and is able to make all these connections looking ahead to the future. We continue to see much more character development in this scene, especially in Liet Kynes, because we've seen several moments of her earlier, but here we really understand that this is a leader of the Fremen. So we see how she talks to them, and they obey unquestionably. So you begin to understand you're this other aspect of her. She's not just part of the Imperium, but she's also really is the leader of the Fremen, which was hinted to further. And then in that conversation, first when she's talking to Paul in the hallway, and then later on when they're in the room with the plans, we also get a sense of like the history and the deep lore, which I've really appreciated when I was watching the movie, especially on the rewatches. Like, first of all, like she's talking about how this station like it's a legacy site. Basically, in the past, they were trying to bring plant life to Arrakis, and it would have been a paradise. But then the spice was discovered, and then like all those plans changed, and the focus was on spice harvesting. And then you get a sense of this history and this the reason for the conflict, because of course the Fremen, they're interested in this promise of being able to live in a paradise. But then like now there's all this tension, because the whole universe is relying on this substance that's only found on their planet. So there's that tension, and you realize how the reason why they're fighting from the very beginning for this past 80 years against the Harkonnens, that ongoing conflict that's been going for generations, even before Kynes was their leader. So you get a sense of the history of the planet. And then when Liet and Paul are having that discussion about, Paul making a play for the throne, and as John, you were mentioning, like, she doesn't grasp that, like what she's saying now, it is an actual possibility, but you get a sense of that balance of powers, because it's really is a situation where you have all these checks and balances. Of course, you do have the Emperor, the Imperium faction, House Carino, who are basically like the most important house in the galaxy, because he's the Emperor, and like we've seen like all the other characters have reference to him about his power and what type of personality he has. But then you also have the houses of Landsrod, and that's alluded to here. Like, basically, if the other houses realized what was happening to House Atreides here, like how this noble house, one of these houses that was respected by so many other houses, how they were simply like behind the scenes, like eliminated by the Emperor. If all the other houses knew this, then they would potentially join forces and rise up against the Emperor, and then they would have the power, because then they would be united. And we've already talked previously about the other factions such as the Guild and the Bene Gesserit. So there's all these different power structures that we get an idea from. So I thought that there was just so much lore and history in that scene, and we see Paul thinking ahead, like several steps ahead, based on what he's seen in his vision. So it's really a lot to dig into, like every time I rewatch this.
Let's move into the action. So this really underscores the bond that you see you've experienced in the movie between Duncan and Paul. I thought Timothée Chalamet just nailed the look on his face when he sees Duncan going down the hall. He makes the connection that Duncan is gonna fight and protect them, but then when he locks the door, Paul just really kind of loses all composure, because he realizes, wait a minute, he's saving us, but how can he withstand the Sardaukar? And of course, Duncan is a master leader and swordsman and fighter. So he does an amazing job. Obviously, this is a very heroic character. He's literally, taking out dozens and, I don't know how many, I didn't count, but a lot of Sardaukar, and then he is overwhelmed and he's impaled, and then that still doesn't stop him, right? And that's a very at first, it could come across as disbelief, like, wait a minute, how could he do that? But having watched the movie a number of times now, there's a quick shot that shows him on the ground with the sword in his body, but he's not dead. You can actually see movement, and I don't know if it's the look on his face. So then when he rises up, After you watch this film a few times, it is very believable, and it's an incredible moment, right? The way he does everything he can at the last minute to protect, so that laser cutter that's going through the door can stop, so that the group can leave and escape. So heroic to the very last breath, and just a lot of great sword fighting, and you hear and you see the shields, and it's great. It's fun. It's tragic, but it's cool.
Yeah, and Garin, I like that you touched on that, because we had a couple of viewers who had like written about that question and went to the email address about, you know, like, was it really believable about that fight, how he took down so many and then like he got up. So Johnny, like, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Garin made some great points. I think, you know, it's funny because I saw one of my friends online was saying that I guess it was a criticism of the movie, or like this in particular, maybe. But he was just like, this guy is supposed to be the best. I was shocked because I had not seen this take anywhere else until he had said it, and I was just like, really? And so but he said this guy is the best fighter in the universe, but he loses his first fight, is essentially what they said. And I was like, he just killed like an entire like squadron of Sardaukar, who are like clearly shown to be much better than any of the regular Atreides soldiers. Like, that was the one thing I thought, if you really couldn't like poke a hole in, was just how well they showed the kind of power and ability levels between the soldiers. The Atreides, and it all happens kind of in that scene on the stairs all the way back at Arrakeen, where, you know, there's the Atreides are in a terrible situation, but they are still taking on the Harkonnens like no problem. They're making their last stand, and then when the Sardaukar get involved, it's just way too much, and they are just like killing them. And then of course Duncan's able to fight his way out. But when they're so overwhelmed, like when they drop down into the actual facility, which is an amazing shot and sequence, by the way, where the Fremen are hiding, and the Fremen are sitting there with their coffee. There's this amazing over the shoulder shot. There's some dialogue happening in their language, which is great because it also is hinting at more, it's giving more Fremen culture. It's also elaborating on the myth of Paul. And then it's just this over, like, he just like turns and it's like, you know, he just noticed something. and then all of a sudden it's just so well cut together, and just the little subtleties. But anyway, it's building up, and but the way they all drop down, and there's so many of them. Again, I didn't count them all myself, but there's like 20, 25, and you're like, there's just no way they're going to get out of this. The fact that they do take as many down as they do, the Fremen do a good job, and then Duncan by himself clearly shows himself to be like the most badass, capable warrior like alive. But what's so great about it is, even though he is the most badass, capable warrior, he is not invulnerable. He is not undefeatable, impervious to getting hit or getting stabbed through the chest. Like, there's only so much he can do. He's not a superhero. So I thought that was great. And it's funny too, because it is different from the book to some degree, although very much similar. But when he goes down that first time, there is that great shot where he's on the ground. And if you watch him multiple times, you will notice, yes, his eyes are open. He's kind of like writhing. But the first time I saw it, when he got stabbed and then he got knocked over and kind of punched out, I was like, wow. I was like, that's it. He's done. I was like, there's no way he's going to get up. But it's funny because there was, and I guess maybe they had CG'd out the sword, or maybe they CG'd in the sword and left it out for some of the promo material. But we had seen that shot before many times, where he comes up and is yelling and then starts swinging his swords. And it's like, you have no idea that there's these other bodies behind him and there's all this stuff going on just previously. So I was so wrapped up in it when it was going on that when the camera does go behind them and it shows Duncan standing up, I was like, holy cow, like, wow, I am like amped up right now, because this guy is a badass, like, to the very end. I just didn't expect that. So that's just how a testament to the filmmaking, where I had seen that shot of him getting up so many times before and attacking them from behind, and it just kind of like, passed out of my mind because of that. So I thought it was great. And again, the way he goes out, he is distracting them. He basically knows he's sacrificing himself. Like, he doesn't expect to make it out of this, of course, but he just does everything that he can until he can't, until he's overwhelmed. And I love, there's this flurry of edits right before he gets knocked down for the last time. And it's like, they are just like hacking away on this dude. Like it's brutal. And of course, PG-13. So it's fairly like it, and the way it's edited though, like you know how brutal it is, but you don't see like a lot of blood or like gore or anything necessarily, because it is, not rated R. So I just thought that was really well done. And then of course, as Garin mentioned earlier, and I mentioned this on Twitter a few weeks back, I think after the last time I saw it, when he falls and the very last shot you see of him is kind of like this close up, like push in on his face and just his eyes open, looking directly into the camera. People were going nuts when I was talking about that. So I think when the story of Duncan's character, continues at some point down the line in whatever form or fashion that takes, there are certainly elements that they can pull directly from the scene and be like, people are going to be able to go back and look at this, whether it's something related to the beetle or related to that last shot. Like, I just love everything about how he goes out in the scene, and the music, of course, Hans Zimmer. The score certainly amplifies the dramatics of what's happening.
My first reaction too, and thank you, Garin, for mentioning that, because my first reaction was like, holy crap, he got up. And it was the second time I watched it being like, okay, so he wasn't really stabbed all the way like I thought. And for the person that was like, well, Duncan's the best fighter in the universe, he got his butt kicked. Also, he's been on the run for a couple days. He might be a little bit tired. I don't know. LeBron James doesn't always score 40, 50 points every night, but it's also crucial that something does happen to Duncan to move Paul and Jessica's story along, and as a big Duncan Idaho fan, I mean, one of my dogs is named Duncan, so that shows you how much I love that character. I thought it was a really beautiful way to end his journey for now. And it's just, Momoa is just like, I only seen like 10 minutes of Aquaman. So I was like, this movie's horrible. So I turned it off. But this, I was like, wow, he can actually like fight and perform. And the whole entire thing also, when he puts up the sword like this, I read or I've seen somewhere that it's a tribute to his son, because his son does a certain kind of martial arts, and it's kind of like how they bow to each other. So it makes it even a little bit more special. And I do think it is important that you see the fear in Paul being like, wait, if Duncan can't get out of this, then we need to run like now. Like, we need to get out of here like ASAP, because it is not safe for us. It's a great scene. Would I love to see more Duncan all through the movie? Yes, but that's what makes him awesome, that we get to see him a little bit here and a little bit there. And it's also it's not a flashback, it's a calling of earlier in the movie when he's like, I saw you die on Arrakis. So it's foreshadowing early on. There's so many little clues to this movie to, like, if you really want to cut it down, like being like, this was mentioned before, this shouldn't be a surprise.
I have to cut Simon off real quick, even though he's done talking now. I will go to bat for Aquaman every day of the damn week, because that is a great, fun action fantasy adventure movie. But that's besides the point. I do agree that Aquaman, Jason Momoa, he is Aquaman. He is Duncan Idaho. He's Khal Drogo. This guy is like the fantasy, like, sci-fi character god at this point. But what's amazing is I never once thought about his other iconic characters watching this movie. And that's a testament to Denis' direction and Jason's performance, which is, I think it is his best. I think he's very committed, and he really, he's said this a lot publicly, that he really didn't want to mess this up, and he wanted to prove Denis right and really earn the role the right way. So I think he should be super proud of what he did. And I really like how you mentioned that little salute. That's something that he brought to the role because of his son. And I think that's really awesome. Now, that's just something that, you can read other meanings into it. If you don't know that story, you can just think it's something in the world, but it's kind of both now. So I think that's really cool. And it's something that comes back later, of course, with Paul. So
yeah, and to close on that scene, I think there are like a couple of things that do make this like really believable for me in the end. Like, first of all, like as we mentioned, like Duncan Idaho has a reputation as one of the greatest fighters. He's like a great sword master, and he's basically been, since he was like 80 years old, he was like surviving like on the streets of House Harkonnen, like fighting against like adults to survive and make his escape. So this is someone who's like been living on fighting since a young age. And from the Sardaukar perspective, their objective is to basically eliminate Jessica and Paul. Like, that's their focus. So like they take down Duncan. They basically think, okay, he's down, and then they're focused like quickly on getting the door. So yeah, they probably like left like him to the side. They assumed he was down, he wasn't going to get up again. But yeah, obviously they underestimated him in that regards. But yeah, like I think it was like a really touching scene, and I think it definitely indicates like the importance of this character, and I'm glad that they did him justice in this adaptation. Then of course things start to like get tense again. So we've had sort of some quiet moments at the beginning of this new chapter, but now it's basically they have to like get out of there, like get in on an ornithopter, like escape into the storm. And then we have the sequence where Liet Kynes herself, she goes out, and then she's going to call a sandworm, and she gets taken out. Starting with you, Simon, like with these things happening in parallel, what drew you in the most?
That last scene with her is just amazing. That's one of my favorite chapters in the book, when it's mostly her just talking about what Arrakis means to her and how much Shai-Hulud. But I like how they were able to give us some of that feeling and also take down a couple of Sardaukar at the same time. I love that she sets the thumper to call him, and when she's like, I serve one person, Shai-Hulud, it shows their commitment to the world of Arrakis and how much Arrakis means to them, and how crucial her legacy is also. We'll find out, hopefully they mention it later on in the second movie, but who she's related to. It's just a heartbreaking scene. Like, I knew it was going to happen that way, but still, it's one of those very much like Alito. This person is sacrificing their life.
So I really like how this shows that, Liet admits she's Fremen. I like that moment in the hallway where she comes clean on that. She says it in a very clear, forceful kind of way. And then if you'll remember, she says, I'm going to take the message to the Landsraad. And so as you're watching this, and one of you guys will have to correct me. I don't remember if that's exactly how it plays out in the book. I don't recall that it plays out exactly like that. But the fact that you have this character who, as we were talking about earlier in the dialogue between Liet and Paul, if this message were to get back to the Landsraad, that would have incredible consequences and chaos, right? But Paul wants the truth to be known among the great houses. So as she's going out, and I recall that this is not how the character. Now remember, we've done a gender swap for this movie, but in the book, Liet doesn't die exactly this way. He does die in the desert in the book, but I love this adaptation. I love how this creates this moment where, for people that aren't familiar, they don't know exactly what Liet is doing. We see the sandworm wave coming. She's up there on the dune top, and then she whips out these things that have hooks on them. And of course, us fans, we go ballistic because we know exactly what's happening here. But then inside, we remember that this character doesn't necessarily have a long job in this film. So the way this was choreographed and cut, I just thought was a great, powerful, exciting way to have this character go out. So hats off to Denis for doing it this way.
It is one of the best scenes in the movie. And I'm glad, like I said, it's one of my favorite chapters in the book, when it becomes this existentialist chapter of just talking to the reader pretty much and explaining how crucial Arrakis is to them. It's a beautiful shot, and it gets rid of the saddle cars in a way.
I mean, this is a prime example of how brilliant they were adapting this novel, because the way that Kynes dies in the book, I mean, it is not cinematic whatsoever. Like, it is not it's not rife for adaptation in a film. It's just, and not to say that I don't like that scene in the book, because I think it is great, and there's very interesting thing going on there with narration and the dialogue and this other stuff, but it wouldn't really work. Like, and I knew for a long time that it was going to be something like this, they were going to change it to, and yet I was still kind of taken by surprise and like enraptured by it when it did happen, because I guess I was just so caught up in the excitement of what was happening. And like, part of me was like, oh, maybe she will get away and like they're going to do it later on or something, but nope. And I thought it was brilliant how you do so much in this scene, and they pretty much had to do it from scratch, because as I said, it is nothing like what it is in the book. Yes, the character dies in the desert in the book. It has nothing to do with worms. It has nothing to do with the Sardaukar. But here in this scene, they completely designed it so that she helps them get away, helps Paul and Jessica get away, which she does in the book as well. Then she goes and she's going to try to pass on word of this message. Then it allows us to be introduced as the audience to a thumper. We get some semblance of an idea of what that means, the correlation between the worm, the rhythm, etc. It's coming toward her. As Garin pointed out, she pulls out the hooks. Everyone who hasn't read the book is like, what the hell is that? What is she doing? And it's funny because I have watched some reaction videos, as I've said, and I love it. It's a multitude of reactions. It's like, oh, what is she doing? You're like, is she gonna like do something with the worm? Like, is she gonna try to ride the worm? Like, what is going on there? And so I like that it's not exactly clear for everyone, just depending on how you think about it. And then, of course, as it's getting closer and closer, we have this, pretty tight close up on her. And then, boom, this water goes spraying out of her chest. And it's like the chest, like bursters from Alien. Like, it is a violent action. Like, she's getting stabbed, of course, but the water, it's like, the way they've built it up in this world, and of course I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure I'm not the only one that was affected in quite this way. But the image of water spraying out of her chest in that way was so alarming, because we know how valuable water is, of course, and we also know that the still suit is in of itself loaded with water by design. And so when it's punctured like that and it comes flying out, you're like, oh my God, like, she just got stabbed. We don't have to see the Sardaukar to realize, oh my God, what that just happened. And then, of course, she yells and drops down, and then the Sardaukar is standing behind her. She rolls down the hill. These last three Sardaukar troopers come over the hill, and just the way they come over it, and you're like, God, these guys they are relentless. Like, you cannot stop them. And that also, again, we talked about their design before. We talked about the color of their uniforms and why I like them so much. They are just covered in blood at this point, and dirty and grimy, and they look just very, unpleasant, which I think is very effective. And then there's that shot with the blade and Kynes in the background, and then there's, of course, where she gives the line, I am not serving the Emperor, like, I am serving Shai-Hulud. So that's when the worm opens up, and of course, this is the second real scene with the worm in the movie, and I thought it was great. You're giving the audience a little bit more of the worm and kind of like satiating us, especially the book nerds that are just like, give us more worm. And so when the mouth opens up and they drop in, you're like, that is, you love to see it. It's a great badass, like sacrificial scene for Kynes. I think it's just a great way to go out for that character.
Like, I like the editing here because again, then they cut back to somewhere different, and you're left wondering, what happened to them. Leave it in a tense moment. So then we see basically Raban, and he's entering the room, and Baron Harkonnen is in his mud bath, recovering from his ordeal with the poison gas in the room. So quick thoughts on this, Simon. What did you think about getting to see the Baron again?
Well, it's kind of the last time we see him in this movie, isn't it? So it shows him being truly disgusting, especially after the previous time we saw him. We thought he was dead, and he rises from his death also, if you really want to go into that meta. And it's a good way to end the Harkonnen story for this part of the film, this part of the story, I mean. And just like, hey, nephew, squeeze, attack, kill them all, because we know that Raban will have some reign now that the House of Atreides is gone. And I'm kind of glad that it ended like that with them. I
actually really like the mud oil bath or whatever thing. That's not in the book that I recall. But the fact that, he's having to heal, which I don't recall that being the book either, but I like how it's very cinematic. I find it really interesting that Raban is actually talking to him when he's underneath the surface of this bath. I don't know, like somehow he can hear through it, but there's a lot of apocalypse now imagery, if you've seen that film. But to have him just be, this is a very short scene. I saw it recently again, and it's very short. It's just mere seconds almost. But it's kind of establishing this next phase of what Raban will do as now controlling Arrakis. And it also shows the just never-ending greed of the Baron. It's like he just about gets killed, but he accomplishes his goal. He's insatiable with wanting to harvest spice and become wealthy beyond belief, and so he's back to that. Raban's going to be his henchman. It's going to go back to the standard procedure again, and a lot of spice production. So I think it's an important establishment that these guys are not out of the picture. They are alive and well, and the Harkonnens are gonna just squeeze the life out of this planet. So they think.
Totally agree with both of you. The main thing that sticks with me, I guess, with regards, of course, we're talking about the imagery and these other things, but like what it leaves you on with regards to the Harkonnens is Raban asks about the Fremen, and Baron says, kill them all. That's that's going to be, they're going to have many, many issues going forward. And because as they pointed out earlier in the movie, they have no idea how many Fremen there are. They are actually way off with their estimate. So they have no chance of killing them all. And also they aren't really aware of, not just their number, but their capabilities as a culture. And really, to be fair, the Atreides, at least Paul and Jessica at this point, they're not really too sure of what they are capable of either. They haven't been in a siege yet. They haven't really been exposed to them. So I like where that kind of leaves it with the Baron. And just, I'm curious, one thing I'm curious about is, because he is being healed in this scene, if there's going to be any residual damage to him in the next movie. Scarring or a burn or anything like that. I'd be very curious. I think that'd be kind of cool, just aesthetically. Hey, and you can make some more new toys because you have a new design to use. But I think that would make sense, and I think that'd be just nice to see that there was some sort of lasting effect. Like he just doesn't heal and he's just fine as if nothing happened. I think it'd be nice just to keep some sort of at least visual reminding us of what Duke Leto did at the very end.
And then that was all we see for Harkonnens for now, and then we go into the last sort of stretch of the movie where we go back to Paul and Jessica. They're in the middle of this storm, like And yeah, it's a really powerful scene because there's at this time, like Paul is being guided in his visions by Jameis, like so he's basically seeing him talking here, and there are like several quotes from a book, like the the mystery of life is not something to be discovered but to be experienced. So like there's a lot of depth in there, and like eventually he releases the controls, and he says, realize, you know, he just has to go with the flow of nature and continue from there. Garin, what did you take away from this storm scene?
I know I've probably run out of this is my favorite scene of the movie tokens, but honestly,
You're cut off, Garin.
That's it.
you can't hear me?
No,
No, we can hear
Oh.
you.
no, you're not. You're cut off from your tokens.
Oh, sorry. I can't say anymore. Okay. I did admit it. Okay. This scene, and the last time I watched it, I loved it as much as I've ever loved it, because it's very Zen Buddhist. It's very philosophical. And I love the fact that you have Jameis saying this in the vision to Paul. So the more times I see this movie, the more I'm able to see all the disconnected future prescient visions that Paul is seeing. And each time I see it again, then I see how it fits together, and how he wasn't, his prescient visions aren't exactly right. He admits that to the Reverend Mother at the beginning of the film. But this scene to me is just beautiful. And I know there's a lot that I could say about this, but he lets go, which is a tenet of Zen Buddhism. You let go, you go with the flow. That's what Jameis is telling him. And then I love the fact that then he figures out a way to re-engage a few of the ornithopter wings to actually create a glider. So two, or I don't know how many wings are on this ornithopter, but there's two outward like wings on a plane, and then he leaves one going backward as like the stabilizer on an aircraft. And then that scene is such again another release, peaceful moment where they're just, you know, gliding through above the storm, I believe is what's happening. And it's just beautiful, it's peaceful, but it's a great lesson, right? How often do we want to just fight in the middle of a challenge and put more energy and more effort into it? And Frank Herbert is teaching us, let go with the flow and allow things to happen. And then you'll find a way, you'll find a solution. So I'm getting all philosophical on you, but this is why I love the depth of this movie. You know, we go from an action scene with Duncan, Idaho, which is just totally cool, to this deep philosophical, even you could say religious kind of connotation to this scene. So, and then I love the sound of all the storm and the sand hitting the sides of the ornithopter. And if you listen to this scene, it's really intense.
You know, what you're talking about, just letting go. In a way, Kynes did that a couple scenes ago. Kynes knew that their destiny was just to let go. You know, as someone that does practice Buddhism, there is that. And there's also this great Latin quote that says, amor fati, just love everything that happens. You know, I have that tattooed on me. You can't control certain stuff. And at this moment, Paul is very much embracing that amor fati, love my faith. Let's just get to safety and see what happens, and not be like angry. Oh, Duncan died. You know, what's going to happen now? We got to keep moving. And one thing about Buddhism is you pretty much have to get your stuff together. You can't just sit there and be like, cool, I have nirvana, I'm good. It's all about keep fighting, never giving up. You know, just keep fighting. And that's what Paul is. That's what they're doing. They're going on to their next part of their life, their next chapter of their life. They don't know what's going to happen. Paul might have visions, and Jameis might be his best friend right now in his head. There's something also very interesting about, I've been thinking a lot about the whole Jameis, I saw my death. Paul becomes a new Paul after what happens with him and Jameis. He is finally Paul, Muad'Dib, Uso, that we've heard about what will happen to him after his fight with Jameis. So there is a lot of rebirth in the last hour of this movie, I think.
Spot on from both of you. I think this is certainly, again, something that isn't in the book. This is just I love what Villeneuve did to include the messaging, as you have both rightly pointed out, like the Buddhist teachings here. And that's Dune. Right? Like that is a huge part of what Frank Herbert was trying to teach and things that he was trying to get across to his readers. Despite this being a huge $165 million sci-fi tentpole blockbuster, like it's amazing what they have been able to actually get into this thing. And I think it works. It's one of my favorite parts of this movie because it is really calming. And I have seen people like really kind of take to what Jameis is saying there and what it means within the context of the film and also just the larger narrative too. So I think it's great. And then of course, it leads to them escaping the storm and surviving. And it's this tranquil, it goes from this storm, which is like in IMAX, probably by far the loudest part of the movie. Like it is, and the sound design is phenomenal. It reminds me a lot of Interstellar and First Man. Just the sound of up against the outside of the craft and the debris and everything. And of course, there's that great, tranquil, peaceful, very much what they were able to earn through listening to that messaging and get to the peaceful other side of this thing. And then they glide. And then of course the wings start just breaking off this damn thing. And they are flipping, they're doing full-on barrel rolls, and it's like Zimmer's score is like cranked up to the max and it's like really intense. And then they crash land, and then they are fully I don't want to say once and for all necessarily, but they are in the desert, and that is where they are going to be for quite some time.
Yeah, this time of in the desert, it's really, we've had this intense sequences one after the other, and now is the time where the movie really does have a chance to breathe. And I know that the cast members, crew, and some of the recent interviews, like you can also see that we've written about, talk about that, the beauty of like being in the desert. Of course, there's the harshness. You have to make sure you're drinking enough water. Like the storms were also an issue in real life as well. But overall, there was this huge awe of like where they were, and like filming in these vast landscapes. And here you really get a chance to see that, and it's really like a peaceful time. Like they get in their still suits. Like it takes some time to show them traversing across the desert. You get some moments, just them in the open.
There is something really interesting in one of the shots when we see them. I think they're sliding down a mountain. It is an homage of the original hardcover of the book, the first printing ever.
Yeah, and then we've seen the sandworm already 2 times in the movie, but like here at the end where they have to make that nighttime crossing across the sand areas, and then like the worm comes and they actually see it up close. So I'm in reactions to seeing the sandworm like basically right in front of them.
So once again, IMAX, definitely worth seeing that. My brother had seen it because he lives in France before, and he told me, he's like, there's a scene, and I was like, I know what you're talking about because of the trailer, but he's like, the worm is massive. My only complaint about these whole entire scenes, but I feel like it gives something to it, they're just so dark. I get it, it's nighttime. You also don't want to make it too bright. You want to keep kind of the surprise of the worm. And I feel like Paul and the worm have a little bit of bonding there.
So this was one of the things I was the most anxious or excited about seeing is what's the design of the worm going to be? Because I will admit, when I was first reading the novel, I could never quite decide exactly what this thing should look like. Is it like an earthworm? Is it like a snake? Is it like electric eel. I mean, I couldn't quite picture what it is, but what I love about what Villeneuve has done here is he mentioned one time, and I think this is an article early on, that they spent a year designing this thing, and it needed to feel and look ancient. And once I had that in my head, and just seeing how incredibly massive this thing is, and how it actually, if it were strong enough, it really could move through the sand like it was kind of a thick kind of water. But to me, it's just, it just nails it, because the fear you feel as you see Jessica and Paul running from this thing, and obviously it's gaining on them. But Denis, he's gentle on the audience, because he makes it clear, okay, Paul's going to make it. He's not going to get just eaten in one gulp. But then, like you said, Simon, there's this moment, and especially on the IMAX screen, the camera kind of zooms in on the mouth of this thing, and it's just like this super low guttural like sound, and it's almost like the worm is speaking to Paul, almost like it's giving deference to him or something, even though I know that's just my own interpretation. And then you hear the thumper far away and it turns. So it's this really interesting combination of something's going on here between Paul and this incredibly massive ancient creature, but then is it going to kill them? Is it going to eat them? And then, you're relieved of that fear, because it turns and follows the thumper. So, going back to the comment that you made, Simon, about how dark it is, having seen this on a number of different screens in different theaters now, the IMAX screens that I saw it on, the night scenes were brighter. I could see more detail of the sandworm and the teeth and everything. But my most recent viewing was on a regular size theater, and it was so dark, I almost couldn't see the sandworm. So I don't know, maybe someone who knows theater mechanics better than me would be able to explain that, but it is supposed to be at night. I understand that. But yeah, I love the design of the sandworm, and I thought it plays accurately, and it also feels real to me.
Honestly, probably the most accurate version will be what we see. HBO Max streaming has its, issues with, internet speed and everything. But when we get the actual home release on Blu-ray and 4K and everything, I think that'll be probably the most accurate on your own, TV and whatnot, if you have that. But I thought it was great. And then, of course, there's this moment where the thumper calls it away. And I just can't get over how amazing the sand effects are in this. And you mentioned it is like a thick water, like it acts and moves like the ocean. And it's just so fluid. It's amazing. I can't get over that. And Guillermo del Toro had a conversation with Denis Villeneuve where he was talking about that. He was like, "How did you do that?" He was like, "But like practically, right?" And talking about the worm, he was like, "How did you capture the mouth like that?" And he was like, "No, it's all CG." And it's just like, it is really kind of hard to believe that it looks so real, and it is strictly CG. So yeah, certainly props to the VFX team on that.
And sorry, Gary, you had touched on that a bit. Like it does feel like Denis is building up some mystery with the worm here, because you're like thinking like what's happening, and I do think that there is maybe like something going on there, but I do think at this point it's they're not trying to hint that there's a connection of like Paul being able to like control worms or anything like that, but it's just more the sense of like they reach the safety of the rocks. And the worm, like obviously, like it can't see in the way that humans can see, so it's trying to determine, okay, like where did they go, and it's trying to sense, and then maybe like do one strike at once, and then like it gets called away by the thumper. So although I think there is this sense like trying to infer that there's something going on there, some connection, I think it's really much simpler than that. And at least I hope that that's not the direction that they're going on. But then we have the encounter with the Fremen. So basically, like Paul and Jessica have reached safety, but then like as they're resting down, you see like them going to the sign language. Like we're not alone, and things heat up quickly there. So, Johnny, what was your takeaway from that initial encounter with the two of them and the Fremen?
Again, pretty much straight out of the book. The setting in particular, I thought it was like, wow, this is exactly how I pictured it, and the illustrations, the original illustrations by Shore, they look spot on. I liked how the use of the hand signals return one more time before the movie ends, which I thought was nice. And then, of course, there is this like, you're not really sure what to think because you've heard so much about the Fremen as the audience at this point. But you also know Paul and Jessica are capable. So what can actually happen here? And then Stilgar is quickly introduced, and we were like, hey, we know that guy. We've seen him before. And Paul kind of has the same reaction. He's like, you know, my dad, I'm the Duke's son. And he has that recognition, and there is a amount of respect there, even though, Jameis, for example, is like, I'm not gonna put up with this. And that's when things, get pretty chippy. And we do see, for example, all these Fremen, we're not alone. And then suddenly it's like they're completely surrounded. You would not have known that 2 seconds ago that there was all these people in the rocks. So it just again, a nice little peek into what the Fremen are capable of, and especially on their home turf when they have, they know the land, they know, how quiet they can be and how to move and everything. So I thought that was great. And then of course, getting into the actual action of the scene, which is very quick, but very, kind of telling. Lady Jessica just within seconds has Stilgar on his knees and with the knife at his throat. And it's straight out of the book, and straight out of the book with regards to how Paul kind of dips and ducks around all these Fremen and scampers up this rock face, and he grabs the gun. And I really liked all that. I was pretty surprised that they actually managed to execute that pretty much exactly how it was in the book. So that was cool. And it kind of reflects, because earlier we see that vision of the battle with the Sardaukar in the tent scene. And they, of course, in that scene, all these, Fedaykin are flying through the air. They're doing flips and all this crazy acrobatics. And in this very quick moment where, Stilgar says, why didn't you say you're a weirding woman? She just does like this flip and twist and is like all around him, and he is just totally at a loss. So I thought that was, again, a great little glimpse into what she's capable of and what they are capable of potentially teaching the Fremen if they so choose to form some sort of alliance. So I thought that was pretty neat. And again, Lady Jessica getting just another little extra, boost there of badassery before the movie kind of wraps up.
And before the others give their thoughts, I wanted to emphasize like the situation that they actually find themselves in. Like just imagine if this wasn't Paul and Jessica, but yourself, like you're like an off-worlder who's come, and somehow your ornithopter has crashed in the desert, and you come across Fremen. That's basically the end for you, because they're basically going to like take your water. Like you're an outsider, like you have no use to them. Like the only use, they basically say that flat out, like the only use that you can give them is the water inside you. Like when Jessica tries to like say like, we're powerful, we can do things, and so it's just like clear like how like harsh how this culture is, and like what a dangerous situation this would have been for anybody else.
Yeah, the thing that first stands out to me in this scene, the sequence, is the contrast of how Jameis has been this person in Paul's dreams and prescient visions that is like his friend, his guide, his assistant in some ways, and yet the first real interaction that we see, or the first action we see from Jameis, is just this intense aggression and rejection of both Paul and Jessica. And so in that moment, what happens as I'm watching the film, especially the first time, is the contrast and wait a minute, Paul's vision of this guy is off. Like, that's not who this guy is. This guy is a threat. So that was one of the things that really stood out to me. And then this is very accurate to the book, and was executed almost flawlessly. And I just really, I think you made a great point, Marcus, that if we want to think the Fremen are pushovers, that's not the case. This is a really rugged, these people know how to survive in the most inhospitable conditions known to man. So, but yet we do see how incredible the training, the Bene Gesserit training and body control and muscle control enables Jessica to best Stilgar. And I even love that Stilgar's responses is almost word for word from the book. And sometimes when I hear the words coming from the book and the dialogue, it just kind of warms my heart. So yeah, this is well executed.
I agree with Garin. I get those warm, fuzzy feelings too when it's stuff from the book on the big screen. Here's something interesting about Jameis. Obviously, he's not Paul's friend. But going back to Buddhism, there is a phrase that says the people that challenge you the most are your friends in faith. And this is Paul's faith. Again, I'm sure we can talk about this last 5-10 minutes, whatever it is, for hours. I also love that Chani doesn't care. She really does not care about Paul. She's like, here's a knife. Die on early. Good luck. You're probably going to be dead. Like, she has no interest in him until the very, very end. I think the fighting is amazing. I still love that it's a little bit dark, and they're like, let's wait until morning. I was like, okay, good. It's not going to be completely dark during this final battle. It's a great scene, and I'm happy that the movie ends at this point. Originally, when I heard there was 2 movies, I wanted to end where we started this episode. I wanted to end when they get out of the tent. That's where I wanted. But I love that we went on this journey. And I've heard people say that last 20, 40 minutes is so slow. But you need that. You need that for the big climax that will happen with the final battle. I think it's amazing. And the sound design as Paul fights, the sleeper has been awakened. You hear all the voices. You hear everything. This is just a small preview of what is coming. So if you guys enjoyed the last, like I said, 20, 10, 15 minutes, whatever, this is more of that in part 2. This is where Paul puts on the big boy steel suit and starts being the Paul that we love and fear at the same time.
There is that moment of real, I guess, revelation to some degree when Chani actually comes and offers him the Chris knife. And it's like, oh, damn. I guess this is happening now, because that's what he saw. That's part of what he saw in the tent. That's really, and of course, he saw Jamis in the Thopter, but this specific item is now arrived. And it's like, we talked about the point of no return earlier in the still tent, because that is when he is full blown, as awakening with those visions and seeing what could happen, what can happen, and accepting this knife. And there's that moment where he's like, hey, Chani. And she's like, what? And he's like,
I'm telling you, she hates him at this point.
It's like, yeah, she certainly doesn't have any, feelings or thoughts about him as a human being at this point. But there's that moment where he's just like, it's a hesitation, and you're wondering, what is he gonna say? What is he gonna, what's he gonna ask, or is he gonna try to reveal something? And he ends up saying nothing, and just kind of hangs there. And I think that's great. And then of course it goes into the fight, and it's just very simple. It's rough and tumble, and it's kind of there's this, it's this understanding that what eventually the understanding comes to is that this is to the death. Paul cannot avoid this. It's similar to this one life he cannot avoid taking if he wants to continue on the path, just as there are many, many, many other lives that he cannot avoid being ended if he continues on this path. So it's a microcosm of this greater possibility. And when that, you mentioned the sound design of this scene, when he does get beaten up, his nose is bloodied, he's on the ground, he realizes that he will not get Jamis to yield. He has to kill him if he wants to survive. but knowing what the possibilities are, knowing what can happen, and committing to that path. And there's a Bene Gesserit voices saying, Paul Atreides, you has to die, Kwisatz Haderach to rise. And it's like this build up, and the music is crescendoing, and it's just like, oh my God, like this is it. There's no putting the stopper back in this once this is done. So there's that little back and forth. The Jamis makes his move behind his back, and Paul ducks and dives out of the way and then kills him. And I love there's a tiny little tender moment that you could almost blink and miss it, but you see in the vision earlier when he was on the ground dying after being killed by Jamis was holding his hand and kind of squeezing it. And then there's this moment when Paul reluctantly kills Jamis, he goes down and kneels. And of course, there's nothing happy about it. There's nothing good about it. He wishes he hadn't done it, but he grabs his hand and like is kind of with him as he has his last breaths and dies.
Going back to that interaction between Paul and Chani, and Dini had talked about this in some of the interviews about, how are they going to convey this, because they've basically been building this up from Paul's perspective, because like he's been like having these visions of Chani for for years, and like in a sense that he knows her, but like here it becomes clear that it's all been one way, like like none of that connection was on Chani's side. And as Simon, you're saying, like she doesn't think positively of him at all. Like she's not impressed. She makes it clear, like, I wouldn't have let you hurt my friends. So all this like connection that Paul feels, like that there is not a real connection. That's going to be come later. But it's just like what was interesting how they basically made that clear, that basically his dreams are not necessarily reflecting on the full reality.
I really like the moment, and I don't really recall this from the book, but I really like what Denis done with this, where so Chani hands him the crysknife, they have a little exchange, and then they both start kind of walking toward where he's going to fight. But before they start walking, it's like Paul wants to say something, almost like he wants to say, I know you, or he wants to say more because he has this connection to her, like you said, Marcus. But she doesn't have it. She's not there. She doesn't think anything of him at this point. She knows he's going to die. So, but I like that pause on his face where he wants to say something, and she looks at him like, are you, what? And he's like, never mind. I love that, because it's underscoring what you just said, Marcus, about even though he's had all this vision stuff of her a lot, it means nothing. There's not a relationship there yet. So I thought I liked that part.
Touching on the fight again, that was also like really authentic how they handled it, because you see that's not mentioned explicitly, but like in the book it talks about like how Paul's used to the fighting with shields. And now like that he's facing someone in combat without shields, like it's sort of like off, and the Fremen think that he's toying with Jamis, and like Stilgar actually say that is he toying with him, and but so that was really authentic. But you definitely feel that Paul is hesitating to take that final action and kill him. And like you do have the thing, like like as the Paul Atreides must fall because how to rise, like this is like like whereas the transformation had started earlier, this is really like the death of Paul, and he's basically rising as this new thing. He's basically gone past that point, like where he could potentially stop some of those events that he was seeing in the future, but now it's too late. Like it's going to continue regardless of what happens next. Basically, at this point, it's like Paul's been fully accepted in the Fremen, and we get that scene that we had seen all the way back in the first trailer about like Paul, like he's killed Jamis, and like the Fremen are touching him, and like as you were just mentioning, Johnny, like he's said it clear, like like he's gonna stay with them, and like be what comes after that. But basically he's entered this new world, and then we get those final moments of the movie where they walk into the desert, and you see like the reveal of the sandworm rider, and like for the people who are new to this, they realize, oh, okay, like so they're riding the worms, and then you have the line from Chani there, and it's so different than what we had seen just a few minutes earlier. Like you felt that Chani was really, really harsh, like feral warrior almost, but like here you see like a different side of her. So that there was that contrast here, and then you have the interaction. You have the on how Paul is looking out, and he has a smile, but like Jessica looks more concerned. So, final thoughts on the ending, Simon?
Speaking of Paul's little smile, I think it's kind of him being, I can maybe trick these people. Maybe they'll start believing in me. I do think it is kind of weird that Chani goes from, I hate you, go away from me, to be like, hey, this is only the beginning. We're going to go somewhere, and it's all be friends. But I love it. I love how it ends. It is the ultimate tease for what comes next, for Paul Atreides, Jessica. And also Jessica is probably wondering in her head, is it finally happening? Is my son going to do what he was meant to do? There's a lot you can take from this scene. I know Johnny's been saying it for a while, but a lot of these scenes we can go back and look at when part 2 comes out, and hopefully Messiah, and children and whatever, but see like they were really setting up a lot of stuff. And I think Timothy, from the little boy that we saw in the beginning of the movie to now, has shown just character in his performance. The first scene we see of him, he's this shy little kid that doesn't want to wake up and, has breakfast with his mom. We're like, okay, he's trying to use this voice. And now he's a badass. He's literally a murderer, and he is. he's gone, he's totally crazy now. And it's interesting, and it's, everything in this movie is amazing. We can still talk about it, I'm sure, for another 6 review of each scene, and we've skipped a lot of stuff, but I love this movie. I'm interested in seeing where it's going. And that line, this is only the beginning, is so true in so many ways.
I really like that this movie ends with a little bit of an up, but it just totally leaves you hanging, right? Because it's almost like those last words from the actors are, my path is into the desert, right? Well, it's for us as the audience too. It's like we're about to go into this new unknown world that we've learned a little bit about, and we know the dangers, but it's going to be a whole new experience in part 2. And then, the way Chani delivers that, and it's only the beginning. I don't think that's in the book, to my knowledge, but it's really, she's speaking to us in a sense. She's like, there's so much more to come. So, I felt like there was a little bit of a blend of Hollywood and Frank Herbert in this last sequence. But every time I see the shot with the Fremen riding the sandworm, because at first it's a distant shot and your eyes are trying to make sense of what's happening. But then as it closes in on that, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a guy riding that thing, and you see him like almost like a horse, and it's just like, oh my, what? How are they doing this? It just opens up this whole new world of, that could be desert power, right? I mean, it's just a huge foreshadowing, but it's a great way to end a part 1 of a part 2 film, of a 2-part film, right? So I agree with the decisions around it. I noticed in the last time I saw it at the theater, there were some people right around me that were just like, what? Like they couldn't believe it was ending like this. And then there were other people that were just like, wow, I can't wait for the next one. So I think you're going to have differences of opinions on how that ended, but I think it's giving us enough to know a lot of cool stuff is ahead.
I think this ending is so dark when you really think about it, and go like beneath the surface. And Simon was talking about that a little bit more, and you, Garin. This is that the look on their faces, it really says it all, because Chani, and that shot is the vision. That is a shot that he has seen time and again of her with the sun behind her and her looking with her headdress kind of in the wind. The way he looks and smiles and like looks up, it's like he knows it's happening. He's like, it's finally coming true. And the fact that it's like the most like, and even his eyes, the way he's lit and everything, like he has a kind of sinister look to him, even though he's smiling and he is the hero, quote unquote, we've been following this entire time. And then of course I thought it was brilliant and perfect to end it with the final shot or close up of any of the characters is of Lady Jessica. And it is her going from kind of like smiling and almost like in awe of the worm riding, which is amazing. And then looking over and being, and like her smile just completely drops off her face. Like it is not a happy, jubilant, feeling of relief or anything. It's like, oh my God, like there's impending carnage waiting to happen.
As we were all talking about, like it's a perfect end of a story arc, because you get like the arc of Paul Atreides, like going from a boy teenager and now becoming a man. So like in terms of like narrative, it makes sense to cut this way, and I'm glad they didn't try to fit in more, because I wouldn't want them to rush like all that world building, like in the siege and all that other stuff. We have plenty of time to explore that in the sequels, but it at the end time it does like leave so much to think about. Like we're talking about, like John, you were mentioning the sinister aspect, and I think that there you get the hints of like multiple things happening in Paul's mind. Like you see, okay, like he realizes, okay, like I'm going to be using the Fremen in a way, like I'm going to be in a position, like we're going to be using that the superstition or the myth or what that they were referring to otherwise, and that's going to enable me to like regain like my position like as Duke, and like eventually going beyond that. But then there's also that element of he's been building up all this connection to Chani through his visions, and it's a really special connection, even though it's like one-sided at this moment. Like that's something that draws him like further into this path. And like as you're saying, like it is really sinister in that way, but it's there's so much going on there, and I think even just those few minutes we'll be revisiting that in the future, like leading up to the next movie. And yeah, we'd love to hear what everybody else thinks. Like are there any final thoughts that you have, like in terms of specific scenes that we discussed? Are there any questions that you feel are still open that you'd like to explore? Like just let us know in the comments wherever you prefer.
So once again, thank you for this journey. Don't worry, the podcast is not over. To quote the movie again, this is only the beginning. You can find me on social media at sdowdy, pretty much my first initial, last name. Would love to hear what you guys think, and thank you for subscribing.
Johnny Sobchak, thank you so much for supporting the podcast and enjoying the show. We love to hear everyone's feedback and your comments, and even if there's criticisms, we certainly need those and look to improve the show for you. And I'm loving the community as it's growing, and will surely grow even more in the next couple of years. There's a lot left to talk about, and whether it's the books, potential shows, part 2 and beyond that with movies. I'm just glad that we have, Marcus has kind of created this platform with Dune News Net, and I think that I certainly appreciate it. It's come a long way from when he first contacted me, and I was like, hey, would you be interested in like anything? I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I definitely couldn't have imagined this, and this is certainly not the end. We're going to be doing these episodes regardless of what we talk about, but this is just recapping the movie in this way has been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed it, and thank you all for watching.
Yeah, this is Garin. I'm on Twitter at Dune Companion. I've just absolutely loved this. I remember a year before the movie came out, knowing people were going to be excited about this story that I've loved for so many years. And so just being able to talk with all these guys about this book and about this movie in particular now, is just, it's just so much fun to me. And so I've loved all the participation, not only from everyone here, but also those who watch and support us and make comments. Yeah, any comment, positive or negative, it's good. Everyone doesn't agree on everything. There's different interpretations of this story. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts. So thanks for supporting us.
Yeah, this is Marcus Gabriel, editor at DuneNewsNet.com. And yeah, just wanted to take a moment. I mean, like, whether it's the website or the podcast or what we've been doing on social media, like it's definitely been a big journey for me and all the other people. So I just want to say thanks for the support and like yeah, and like letting us know what you're interested in. So just like keep yeah, sending us your thoughts. Or are there things that you'd like to see more of? Like, are there things that in terms of different types of content you like to see? Like, that's definitely something that we're going to be exploring in the coming years as we like wait together and prepare for Dune Part 2. And as others have alluded to, there's going to be the TV series, hopefully some games coming out. So yeah, this really is just the beginning, and really excited to have you all along for the ride.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.